Thanks for listening to Baxie's musical podcast, where a 40-year radio veteran who looks and sounds almost exactly like me talks to Hall of Famers, up-and-comers, legends, producers, journalists, record executives, and more to talk about music and the amazing stories behind it all. If you like what you hear today, be sure to subscribe to it, like it, rate it, follow it, share the hell out of it. You can also follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook for regular updates about upcoming guests. Today, we're brought to you by Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep and Ram at Chicopee. Be sure to stop by their state-of-the-art dealership next to BJ's and Big Y on Memorial Drive, or stop by their website at metrojeep.com and make it Metro. And then drive home in your new Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram today.
It's Baxie's musical podcast.
In July of 1987, Guns N' Roses released their multi-platinum debut album, Appetite for Destruction. Now, the only reason I'm telling you this is because for the next several years, every record company and radio station in America began scrambling to find the next Guns N' Roses. In hindsight, I wouldn't wish that upon anybody. Not because Guns N' Roses wasn't great, but because expecting anyone to meet or surpass the sale of 18 million copies of a debut record was a pipe dream, a total setup. And yet, there were still a handful of people who believed that the next Guns N' Roses were right around the corner, which they were not. Not even Guns N' Roses could keep up with being Guns N' Roses forever. However, record companies and radio stations, in a desperate effort to duplicate the unduplicatable, kept on trying anyway. There were a few promising contenders out there, some of whom enjoyed a good deal of success, but then there were some others who came this close but missed it by that much. One example of this was the band the Sea Hags. The Sea Hags were a trio out of San Francisco that only managed to release one album, their self-titled debut album in 1989. This is a band that had built up a huge following with a great set of demos produced by Kirk Hammet from Metallica and Siliva Masse, who would go on to produce the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Tool, System of a Down, and Johnny Cash. The Sea Hags were a band that included guitarist Ron Yoakum and bass player Chris Schlosshart, and drummer Greg Langston, a band that appeared to have everything going in the right direction until it didn't, including having former Guns N' Roses producer Mike Klink hired to work on that debut album. However, just before the band began pre-production on that 1989 debut record, things started to change. Drug use was causing huge problems in the studio. Money was being wasted by the thousands, and on top of that, the band fired their drummer Greg Langston and obliterating the powerful chemistry that made the Sea Hags such a promising band to begin with. When their debut album finally was released, it went nowhere, and that led to the band breaking up. Now, you might think that would be the end of the story, but it isn't. In fact, the story behind the band is really damn interesting. This was a great band that was destined to be huge, but got in their own way. How good were they? You should check out their demos online called Hag of the Sea. Or you can check out the latest release from Liberation Hall Records called Dead and Gone, a previously unreleased live in-studio performance from 1986 at CD Studios in front of a crowd of about 60 people, featuring the original lineup just before signing with Chrysalis Records. It's a pretty amazing document of a band that should have been huge. To talk about that, plus his own background in music, is former Sea Hags drummer Greg Langston on Baxie's musical podcast. I'm really glad to have you here today because this is not the first Liberation Hall release that I've covered on this podcast. In fact, about 2 years ago, I interviewed Hugh Patterson from No Alternative, and we talked about the Live from Mabuhay Gardens session that came out from 1980, and I think you played on that one, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh yeah, as a matter of fact, I helped put that one together. I didn't, and then in typical Hugh fashion, he didn't even tell me that you interviewed him. So that's funny. Yeah.
Well, that's okay.
We're slowing down a little bit because of my schedule and because elderly parents and things like that. But we've done 2 really good shows this year so far. And No Alternative's probably going to be doing, a few more in the future. But I think the approach with that is going to be more when we're matched up with some appropriate old school punk bands, so that uh, we get a little bit more of a crowd
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah, I have to say, I've really enjoyed what Liberation Hall has been doing. Releasing these lost performances. Some shows that had never ever seen the light of day, and from just from an historical documentation of some of these bands, like No Alternative would be a perfectly good example. Not enough people would know who they were, but yet they were a really important band in San Francisco. And now this is like I think it's at least your second Liberation Hall release. What are your thoughts about what they're doing and the kind of exposure they're giving, some of these older bands?
Oh boy, do I have an opinion on that. So, if you were around the punk scene from, 1977, 78, I really started to get into it right when it was starting. And a lot of the groups that were playing back then in the city, I'm mostly familiar with the ones that were in the city or in Los Angeles. To me, these were big bands. And you've got your LA groups like the Plugs and the Controllers and the Bags, and you can go on and on with that. But to me, these were big bands. And in the Bay Area, you had Versus. Nobody thinks about Versus anymore. The Victims were really popular. The Offs, the Mutants, and lots of other ones. And the group I play with now, the Sleepers. Sleepers AD is what we call it now. And a lot of these groups were just top names that could draw a lot of people. But what happens now is you get younger folks that grew up in a different era, maybe the late 80s, maybe the 90s, maybe the 2000s. They don't know any of these groups. And they might have seen the name on a poster or something, or but they're into what they were into in the groups that were playing in that era when they were going out to the clubs. So I think that what Liberation Hall is doing is really helpful to that, the older scenes. They put out record by the Contractions recently, and Kathy Peck had a little birthday get together, and I got to play at it, and the Contractions actually played a few songs, and that's pretty cool. I think with Liberation Hall, they're even getting some of these groups to even maybe perform again, or at least think about it.
It's interesting because like at least with the like with Mabuhay Gardens, I mean they were recording these shows, and a lot of the bands that were performing there may not even realized that those performances were being recorded. And when you were like playing with No Alternative, did you realize that that was something that they were doing back then, or were you surprised to know they even existed?
I was, and a lot of those came from the sound man at the time, and a lot of that stuff is just pure gold because now people can record things pretty easily. But Terry Hammer recorded a heck of a lot of stuff, and it's really, really impressive at what Terry Hammer did. Terry passed away, I guess, a couple of years ago, which was a real shame because he was really instrumental in sharing that stuff. He had this whole body of work, and he was really, really generous. He didn't just hang on to it and say, "Oh, look what I've got in the closet here. Ha ha ha! This is worth a lot of money." No, he didn't do that. A long time ago, I mean, years ago, he had two No Alternative recordings, and he sent them to me, um, which is absolutely fantastic. And one of them that we did at the Keystone, I don't really want anyone to ever hear because there's a lot of mistakes in it. Things are a little bit different back then too. And looking back on things, there was this whole different vibe about the scene, and there was a sense of freedom where you could do what you wanted. And part of that was getting loaded and boozing it up and everything. And uh, so there's a couple of recordings that seem a little bit more embarrassing than others, just because we didn't play as well.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, some of those recordings are even better because we were just in a frame of mind where everything just flowed so well.
I think some of those recordings with all the bumps and bruises that were going on at the time, and you're right. I mean, there's a lot of instances where maybe the substances actually enhanced what the performers were doing in those on those tapes. I think it's really interesting to hear because I mean, I grew up with listening to live records like everybody else, and I know that there's production tricks that were done to salvage certain songs. But these recordings, I mean, I think are really reflective of what a lot of these bands are truly all about. No Alternative is a perfectly good example. The Mutants, another good example. A band that, people who may never have seen play live, or, songs that just had never had an official release. It's so important to kind of see that, to see, where this music comes from, and where the scene develops as a result of just the bands we're talking about.
Well, you bring up a good point there. I was actually looking at a list of somebody's top 100 punk songs from I don't know, between 78 and 80 or something, and it was mostly UK groups. But then there were four Dead Kennedys songs on that list, and it gets you thinking that Dead Kennedys were just another band. I mean, they were a really good one, and they became a headliner really fast. But there were a lot of groups, the Offs and the Mutants, and all of these groups were pretty top. Negative Trend, now people look at old punk and they think of the Avengers and Flipper and the Dead Kennedys, who are all great. But there's a lot of groups that were right at that same level that have sort of come down a little bit. The Offs were a top band. The Mutants were a top band. And by the way, I am playing drums for the Mutants in their last shows. And I don't want to say last shows, but everybody's getting a little
Right.
older. So every show that happens could be the last one. And if Dave, the original drummer, wants to come out from the East Coast for a club show, it's better than me doing it, but I'm happy to do it. So I've been doing that for about 4 years.
I mean, your history in punk is really remarkable. Not just No Alternative, but also Tuxedomoon, some of the other things that you had done. It's kind of interesting that what we're talking about today is a band that really is not a punk band, more of a glam rock outfit with Sea Hags, and I've got the CD, Dead and Gone, and it's a really interesting story behind this, and especially in this performance, because we talk about taped performances. In this situation, this was an afternoon show that was recorded live in the studio in front of about 60 people. What was the thought behind recording on that day with a studio audience?
Well, a couple of things. Our manager was Paul Ratt. Paul Ratt was a popular concert promoter around here, and we were really lucky to have Paul as our manager because he really did book us in a lot of shows. However, there just wasn't a whole lot of money coming in, or I don't know, maybe Paul was getting all the money, but recording all of these songs in the studio was a way that we could get all of this stuff done in one take in a really good studio. I mean, we had Siliva Masse, who's gone on to become an absolute top producer. Gary Hobish, who worked at doing mastering at Fantasy Records forever. He sadly passed away a couple of years ago. Really good friend. But we had top people behind the board, so it was a way to get our set down and really not spend that much money. I mean, I can tell you that going into the studio today, we're spending a lot more money going into the studio 8 times or whatever. We went in one time and we knocked it out. Paul realized that we were pretty much at the top of our game right around that time. We were doing quite a few shows a month. At that point, we were going down to Los Angeles maybe once or twice a month. And I think by that time we'd gone up up the coast to Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver. But it was all around that time when we were playing a lot, and we were really, really comfortable playing with each other. And I think that to get a good performance, you just have to feel comfortable. There's times when I'm playing and there's some little tricky little thing that happens and you kind of tense up about things. But it was never that way with the Sea Hags, especially at that point when we'd been playing together so much. So anyway, that was kind of the plan behind that, was to get a lot of songs done quickly, and we did. A pretty good performance too.
Was there any thought of releasing it back then, or was that not really part of this at that point?
Well, Paul Rat was kind of all about demo tapes and things, and he would release little snippets of this on little handmade cassettes and things. Not the full show. A couple of these songs, people have heard them before because they'd come out on just a little local cassette or something. But as the group got to be more popular, we kind of outgrew his management, and the management that took us over had a much bigger vision for the whole thing. So a lot of the old demo tapes, they got pushed in the back, and we ended up doing a number of more demo tapes. And then later on it was shopping for the big record labels, and there was interest, which
Yeah.
was pretty cool. So yeah, no, we recorded it at Dave Denny's studio as doing like a practice album for the Chrysalis album. So nobody's heard any of that stuff, but
Right.
there's still some studio recordings out there.
So after all this time had passed, and because you're talking, 40 some odd years or so, where did the tapes come from? How did this reemerge after all this time?
Well, I'm kind of an archivist. So at a certain point, probably 15 years ago, I went through all of my cassettes that I had, and a lot of them were on really good cassettes. And I transferred all of that stuff to digital. So I probably have 300 recordings of groups that I played with that I transferred from cassette to digital, and then at least you've got a digital copy of everything. And that's where we are. A lot of this stuff didn't really get into the studio. I'm glad that when I was able to hand this stuff off to Liberation Hall, that we got some mastering done on it. And it's a different era here. We didn't have digital recording back then.
But after all is said and done, even though it may have been on a cassette recording, it does sound awful good considering the source that it came from.
Well, the sets came right from the studio. This is not a third or fourth generation. This is right from the studio and then transferred to my CDs. So yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, there's always a little more you can do in the mastering process, and really that's up to who's in the back there. Anyway, I'm pretty happy with the way it came out, and Liberation Hall has been super supportive, and they've set me up with interviews, and it's really nice to have a team behind a project. So if Liberation Hall, if you're listening, I probably have more stuff you like.
Good. So the Sea Hags have actually got a really interesting backstory. I mean, you featured Ron Yoakum on guitar, Chris Schlosshart on bass. By the time you joined them, you had already had quite a resume built up. Like I said, No Alternative, Tuxedomoon, Fade to Black, bunch of other bands that you had been in. How did you wind up joining these guys? What was the conversation like to say, hey, why don't you stop doing that punk stuff and join us for a while?
Oh, that's an easy question, because I here's a little bit of background. I had been I had been playing with a group called Beast, which had Brian Gregory from the Cramps in it, and uh, the Cramps were absolutely huge in the early '80s. So
Sure.
everybody's thinking, oh, he got to play with one of the Cramps. Not only is it one of the Cramps, it's one of the most colorful members of the Cramps at the time, with a lot of mystery behind him. Well, that group broke up in England, in London, or I came back. I needed to finish up a last semester at SF State and get a degree. And so what was really comfortable for me was to jump into Fade to Black, which Fade to Black was playing similar dark, sort of gothy style of music. And it also had two of my best friends in it, Jeff Reese, who was the bass player from No Alternative, and his wife Paulette. So I was playing that style of music when Ron Yoakum approached me. And I got to tell you something about Ron. He can talk anybody into anything. He talked our way into a record contract too. I remember so I was doing two bands at once. And Ron basically talked me into it. I did a few shows with them, and the music to me felt like something that was really really comfortable, um, in the sense that because I used to play music at home through my headphones as a teenager, listening to hard rock, playing to Blue Oyster Cult or Deep Purple or whatever, before punk rock days. And Ron, uh, Ron and Chris were really, really nice guys. And the other thing I noticed is when I was doing shows with them, they were attractive younger guys. There'd be a lot of girls coming to the shows. I thought, you know what? This music's a lot of fun for me to play. There's people coming to the shows, and
And there's girls.
and there's girls, and um, it got to be that I couldn't do two at once because the Sea Hags were getting to be really, really busy with the shows. And I had to, Fade to Black was right at that time looking to um, swap out singers. And I thought, I'm going to stay up until they can get a new singer and help them out. And then I remember being in the rehearsal studio and saying I have to leave the band. And oh my gosh, it was so hard talking to your good friends. Everybody practically started crying, and that was kind of tough.
I
But
bet.
that's how I joined. That's how the start of the Sea Hags really started with me, and was Ron basically being extremely charming and saying you got to stay with this.
There's obviously a pretty good chemistry that built up between the three of you. I was just listening to the Hag of the Sea EP on YouTube from 1986, and it's like remarkably good for demos. And one of the notable things about it, it was just co-produced not only by Siliva Masse, who you mentioned before, but also Kirk Hammett from Metallica. How did you get involved with like Kirk Hammett?
Well, let me just back up a little bit. The Hag of the Sea demo is, I think, 6 or 7 songs, and then there's a couple of songs added onto that. There's the two that are produced by Kirk Hammett, and I think there might even be one or two more on there from we actually were in the studio more than a couple times. So what you're hearing one of the very, very best demos, the Hag of the Sea demo with the Kirk stuff added on and a couple more. So uh, I guess, as far as I know, Ron brought Kirk into the fold. I think that Kirk must have heard us or heard about us, because all of a sudden he was just there and really interested in working with us. And again, we were in that same studio, and Kirk was sitting there on guitar, just playing along to all of our songs. So that was pretty fun. And he worked out a fabulous solo on Love Kills. When we were doing our recordings, he was sitting there at the board with Sylvia, and they were just working together. I thought that Kirk was a fabulous person to work with. It was brief. I think Ron was the one that hung out with him more than I did. But I didn't really know him. I mean, I'm not a starstruck person, and I'm also not a metal person. The Sea Hags at that time, people might lump them in with the glam rock, but that's not really at all what we were. It's like Metallica's not a glam rock band either. We would play with some of those bands that were associated with that, but we played with everybody.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that gets lost with with the passage of time. If you ever look at the Sea Hags in Wikipedia, it's completely wrong. And, I don't care. I mean, it says we were a Seattle band. We're never a Seattle band.
I think based on the time and what's going on in the world, I think people get lumped into stuff just because no one knows how to market them or present them in any other way. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if everyone's talking about Seattle and glam bands or whatever.
Well, I actually really liked playing with, groups like Soundgarden and Red Cross and we played with a few of those bands. I didn't really care so much about playing with the really, what they call hair metal,
Right.
with Faster Pussycat and LA Guns and such. That really wasn't my thing, but I really liked playing with the more post-punk bands, or like I say, we played with pretty much everybody.
I heard this really interesting story. Talk about Metallica. Apparently, at one point, and correct me if I got this wrong. At one point, James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich came to you and said, "Hey, could you teach us a little bit about punk music? We just don't know that much about it." And you introduced them to a lot of that stuff that may have eventually gone on to their Garage Days EP in '87. Is that story somewhat accurate?
Somewhat, but the members you're talking about are a little bit different. It was actually Kirk that asked me to make a cassette of this stuff. But James and Lars were actually at my house one night after we played. They played at a huge show in Oakland at Henry J. Kaiser Center, and then they came to our little show in Alameda. And I remember being up there on stage and just seeing the four guys in Metallica after they'd come back from their big show, just sitting there watching us. And, Lars was actually impressed with my drumming, which is a great compliment because, I don't think of myself on the same kind of level as Lars at all. But they came to my house and we had a very late drunken night. And they were listening to my records all night. And I eventually needed to tell them to go home. And I had to work the next day and everything. It was a big mess. But the next morning I found out they'd broken my toilet. So there you go. So I made a cassette for Kirk.
Okay.
And the cassette for Kirk, I just was very thoughtful about it and put a lot of my favorite punk songs and funny punk songs and un-PC punk songs. And
Do you remember what was on the cassette?
well, no, but I do remember that they didn't know punk stuff. Of course, I didn't really know metal stuff too. I mean, I learned more about Budgie and groups like that when that Garage Day EP came out. But when the Garage Days Revisited came out as a double record, there was a song on there called "So What," and that was by the Anti-Nowhere League. It's a very, very un-PC song, but that's exactly the sort of funny stuff that I was into back then. Well, they recorded that song, and I have no proof of this, but because I made that cassette and I know that they were listening to it when they were driving around in their van touring and everything, all of a sudden that song, they recorded it and put it out on Garage Days Revisited, the expanded version. So
Yeah.
in my mind, that's how they knew about that.
In other words, they'd be nothing without you.
No, they'd probably be bigger without me.
It's so funny because I started in radio in the mid '80s, '85, '86, and I remember at the time that record companies were like so hot to find the next Guns N' Roses, and the Sea Hags were like one of those bands that kind of fit into this sphere, and there were tons of bands that were always, oh, this is the next Guns N' Roses. Well, that might be one of the worst things you could ever bestow on a band, is to be the next anything, especially Guns N' Roses. But the Sea Hags were certainly a band that were heading in a certain trajectory. You talk about all the shows you're doing. You're talking about all the audiences are growing, and there's all this interest from record companies. Certainly, as a member of this band and being there at the time, you had to kind of see this feeding frenzy starting to happen as bands were getting signed left and right, whether they were ready for it or not. Was that your experience back then?
Oh, I think so. If you think about a group like Guns N' Roses, you have one group that is kind of the picked. There, it has to do with marketing and such. There are a lot of groups that were probably just as good as Guns N' Roses. Um, but you've got your top band, and then you have another tier that's like right below them. You'd have your LA Guns and Faster Pussycat and probably four other ones, and then under that you have 40 or 50 that are below that.
From radio's perspective, what was happening, at least from our perspective, is there were bands that were emerging that were not necessarily at that level, but record companies were seeing an opportunity to make money, as they always have, and as you would expect. When it comes to what happened to the Sea Hags, you guys are getting noticed. Record companies are starting to show, a lot of interest. You wind up signing with Chrysalis. Did you, at some point, get the sense that Chrysalis had a larger plan for the Sea Hags, or were you just kind of being swept up in the moment of all of that?
Oh, I was completely swept up in the moment of all of that. You know, um, as the drummer, in some ways you're just kind of going along with a lot of the things that are happening. I think we absolutely were ready to be at that point where we could have, I mean, I was certainly ready to jump up into that other level. I think we all were. It's a time in your life where I was 26 or 27. Ron and Chris were a little bit younger, and it looked to me like this was a real chance to, follow a dream. So I absolutely think that like I say, I was a little bit swept up in it, and I didn't really expect that behind the scenes, Chrysalis might have their own ideas of how to reshape things. But there's a lot of money being thrown around, and Chrysalis wants to protect their interests. And so you get these people somewhere behind the scenes in a boardroom and saying, well, how can we make this group better and everything? And they really messed with the chemistry of the group, and they brought in a couple more people. And I did meet Adam, the drummer. I've never met the guitar player. But they switched things around a little bit. They thought that they needed another drummer. They didn't think that I could play my parts quickly or as accurately enough. And I got sent home, and that was a really crushing moment for me. And I didn't really want to. I didn't even really want to listen to the record when it came out. But they seemed to do well. They're also Everything happened at a time where Ron and Chris were really getting a little bit more serious about getting into drugs rather than their songwriting. One of the things that was happening when we were performing was we'd have this songwriting would just happen. Brilliant songs would just come hard and fast. And I think that once Chrysalis and that era was happening, there was this whole idea that we could do no wrong or whatever between Ron and Chris. And, in my opinion, this is the time we're supposed to be working the hardest. And I really was trying to work the hardest. And I did find some frustration in the times when we were doing the pre-production for the album that everyone wanted to smoke pot instead of practice.
Right.
And I'm like, come on, you guys, this is what we ought to be doing. So I don't know. I feel like I being the kind of the responsible one in the group, they got rid of me, and that probably wasn't really a good idea.
Yeah.
And Ron and Chris not standing up for me was pretty hard to take because we were all best of friends.
I mean, I have to believe that you must have been completely blindsided by this. I mean, did you see this coming? I mean, was there any discussion prior to you being let go that this was a possibility, or was this just a surprise to you?
It's pretty much a surprise. I mean, you're touching on some pretty sensitive moments here, but it's so far in the past that you look back on things and you look at the way that your life has progressed, since then. And Chris has passed away, and nobody can find Ron. So, and I'm doing fine. So, I also feel as though I really avoided some real drama that happened with the group afterwards. Or I've heard a little bit from a couple of people that used to work from the group about a few things that happened. And I'm not real nosy about stuff like that, but I've heard a few horror stories about what happened after I left, and getting arrested for drugs on the road and missing shows, and some really bad stuff.
What's interesting to me, because I've heard the album that they completed, and then when I compare that to Hag of the Sea, it's like, had that been the first album, you'd be talking about a totally different story right now. I mean, I think had Hag of the Sea been the first thing out, and maybe cleaned up from the demo version of it, it would have been a heck of a record. And it just, when you listen to what they finally did with Chrysalis, it's like, man, there are some good things on it, but I can also see where it didn't take commercially. And I don't know if Chrysalis kind of washed their hands of it, or what it was, but it didn't sound like they didn't sound like the band that they had been with you.
Oh, absolutely. And I know that Ron was really looking forward to being as commercial as possible, and his vision was not the raggedy raw band that we were really good at, but he really did want something more slick. He was a big fan of like Aerosmith and Cheap Trick and groups like that, and everything else, punk stuff too. But he liked a lot of the slick music. I mean, Aerosmith was a huge influence to him,
Yeah.
and so I think that he really did want to have a really slick product out there. I'm not really. I don't think that record really sounds like the group that I played with, um, but it's close. I mean, it's pretty close. The song structures are there. The Mike Klink messed around a little bit with a few things. He's got another guitar player in there. The song structures are pretty much the same. He changed a few things, but for the most part, um, it's in the production work that made that group sound
Yeah.
more like a typical Los Angeles group from the late '80s, rather than what the group really was all about in the original incarnation. When I played with the group, I think I brought a little bit more of the punk style to the whole thing. I mean, I really did. I mean,
Yeah.
that's where I came from.
Well, I mean, I hear a much more of an edge in Hag of the Sea than the first album, and I think, for me, I appreciate the whole breadth of what you guys are talking about, and especially your career. Like that, that would have been the record that I would have bought, as opposed to what wound up coming out. I know it's at some point though, years after this, there was some attempt at a reunion from Sea Hags. What happened with that?
It's pretty much a disaster.
Mm.
Um, we did we did 3 shows, and I can be pretty frank about this. As we did our first show, Ron brought in a bass player from up in Petaluma that didn't really know the songs very well, and we did our first show, and it was okay, but when I started working with Ron again, it was a little frustrating because um, he didn't really have a good amplifier, so I'd have to drive him around and find an amplifier, and just sort of getting things off of the ground, even practicing was a little frustrating. He also seemed to think that it was still 1987 or whatever it was, and I wanted to just come to practice and run through the set and then go home. I had a little daughter by that time, and I needed to go home and be with the family.
Yeah.
And he wanted to hang out, and I couldn't. I
Yeah.
just, I got responsibilities and everything. Um, anyway, we did 3 shows, 2 with a bass player, and then the third show, which is actually on YouTube, is just Ron and myself at the Mabuhay Gardens. And um, I'm doing what I do. I listen to the guitar player, I listen to the singing, and I just focus, and I can play. I
Yeah.
mean, I do that. I do that now. I mean, I can sometimes I can get on the stage and and nod when there's a stop and let me know when the song ends, and I can do it. Um, so we didn't really get a whole lot of practice, and there were 2 different bass players because the first one just said, "I'm out of here. I'm not going to do this." And then we had another guy come in, and I went out to his house and I said, "Look, let's get together before we get together with Ron. Go through all the songs, and then we'll be ready when we get to practice with Ron." Well, we tried that too, and it got to be super frustrating. So I wasn't really that happy with that little reunion.
Right.
If Ron would get himself together and we can get a bass player and knock out these songs, I would do it again.
Yeah.
I think, but it really depends on everybody's state of mind at the time.
In
So
in light of that, and to go back and listen to these tapes and have them, released, knowing where that band had come from and where it was going and where it eventually ended, I have to believe there's some pretty bittersweet feelings about this. On one hand, you have to be incredibly proud of what you guys did accomplish, but on the other hand, it's like, it didn't end the way I don't think anybody really expected or wanted it to. But yet, when you listen to these when you listen to this performance, listen to the show, it's like, this is a hell of a band and had a hell of a lot of promise. And I mean, I don't, I'm sure there is some bittersweet feelings about it, but now that it's out and people can hear it, what is your feeling today about the Sea Hags and their music?
yeah, this just comes at a time when I'm really looking forward to the projects that I'm working on right now.
Yeah,
Um, I'm proud of the fact that this has come out, um, and I hope it sets the record straight just a little bit. But I'm really more concentrated on moving forward and the groups that I play with now, and that's sort of where my head is at. And I'm not all about Sea Hags, Sea Hags, Sea Hags. Let's all try and have a reunion. Let's sell 1 million of these. Well, I hope it does sell 1 million of these, because I hope it does.
yeah,
But as time passes, I think a lot of the things that I really wanted to happen when I was younger don't really matter as much anymore to me. I and our audience, we still have some super hardcore fans that I think are going to buy this and are really going to enjoy it. But a lot of people have moved on as well. And because of the age that I'm at right now, um, you get a lot of people that have moved on in their lives. I mean, a lot of people have grown up and gone their own ways and moved on from even music. Um, and that's just always the way that it is.
yeah.
But I'm still enjoying performing and playing and recording, and I hope I can just keep on doing that as long as I want. But the I don't really have the vision for myself of becoming what the Sea Hags with me could have been. I don't have that now. I'm not looking to become to sign to a major label. I mean, yeah, I mean it could probably won't happen at my age, but uh, you know, um, I'm going out on tour next month and just doing my thing, and it's fun.
Well, that's the reason people get into bands in the first place, to have fun.
Yeah, and I'm still recording and making new recordings, and they may not sell like a Sea Hags album would sell, but I'm still out there
Yeah.
doing it.
Well, I'm not going to keep you for much longer, but just to reiterate what you are involved in and what is coming up. I know No Alternative was one of the projects that you're working on, but what else is coming up?
Well, I play with the Sleepers AD, which is the Sleepers songs with the original bass player Paul Draper and Brad Gates, who Brad was involved with the Palo Alto groups as well back then, and Elliot Shannonhouse is the guitar player. And I got to say, with the Sleepers, original Sleepers, one of the main things, other than the crazy singer Ricky Williams, was the guitar player Michael Belfer, who was an amazing guitar player. Well, I played in a band with Michael at one point called Fire Sports, and our present guitarist, Elliot Shannonhouse, had also played in a couple of bands with Michael Belfer. So there's a big connection with the old Sleepers and the new Sleepers AD, plus, having the original member, Paul Draper. We're writing new songs, and we're playing a lot of the old favorites that everyone wants to hear. And we're playing Sunday in San Francisco. And after that, I pack my suitcases and drive down to LA. And we're going to start a little tour with Los Microwaves. And Los Microwaves was a whole different kind of band. And we're flying to New York and playing a show at the Bush Tetras, and then we're hitting the road for about a week and a half and playing all over the place, Pennsylvania, all the way down to Virginia, Massachusetts, a bunch of shows.
That's great.
I haven't really been on the road since the old Fang days. So yeah. I mean, I've played some shows, basically fly somewhere and do a show, but I haven't been in a van with a bunch of people. But at least it will be a band with people who've grown up rather than people who are
in suspended animation. Right. Yeah, I get it. Greg, this has been great. This has been a lot of fun and really interesting. I appreciate the time you have. Best of luck with everything you're doing. I know it's going to be a pretty busy couple of months for you.
Yeah, I've got a Mutant show coming up in November too. So
great.
So that's going to be a lot of fun.
Very good. Greg, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Absolutely.
Okay, over and out.
Oh yeah. Okay. Take care now. Bye-bye. The name of the new release from the Sea Hags is called Dead and Gone, now available on Liberation Hall Records. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you can reach me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks to Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee for their support, but most of all, thanks to you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.